And we are back. Welcome back to the Premier League prediction series. Before we get into today's video, I have to say a massive thank you again to all of you guys. Our best ever week on the channel, 25,000 views on the European videos this week and almost 500 brand new subscribers, which has blown us past the 8,000 subscriber mark as we are on our way to 10,000 subscribers. So again, a massive thank you to all of you guys for all the interactions and support you've shown the channel, especially over the course of this week. And best believe European videos will be returning once we hit the playoff matches and then through to the knockout stages. As for this week though, it is of course Premier League Game Week 24. It is a double game week as Liverpool and Everton will finally be playing that rearranged game from earlier on in the season. But what I will say is I will not be covering this game in this video because there are matches for these sides in between these games and then that one. And I never like to make multiple predictions on the same team, certainly within one video. And certainly when you consider that Liverpool have the game against Bournemouth in this weekend, then the second leg of their Carabao Cup semi-final, then an FA Cup game before that Everton game. It'd be absolutely foolish to make a prediction for that Everton game when there are literally 3 matches to be played before it. And of course, FPL fans, don't forget it is a double game week to put your Liverpool and Everton players in your teams. As for the prediction series though, as we skip ahead to the prediction screen, you'll see that we were only able to manage 5 out of 10 last week in the Premier League, which is a little bit disappointing because I was actually 5 out of 6 at the end of Saturday. But it is the way it is. 116 out of 229 in the Premier League. But another good week in Europe means that our season scores are now at 512 out of 897 and 58 correct scores now because we were actually able to get 4 correct, including 3 in the Europa League last night. So I'm very happy with that. So if you haven't done so already, please do consider dropping a like on this video if you do enjoy all of my prediction series. As always, we are completely transparent with you guys about how we perform in these videos, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here so you don't miss out on any of those other videos we've got coming up across all the other competitions over the next few weeks. And without any further ado, let's get stuck into it. It is Game Week 24. This is the rematch of Game Week 5. And as you can see at the bottom of your screen, on Game Week 5, when these fixtures were reversed, I got 6 out of 10. So big challenge in order to beat that for this week. But let's get things started, as always, with the early kickoff. And it is Nottingham Forest taking on Brighton. 2 sides that had rather humiliating losses, in my opinion, last week. Nottingham Forest going down to Bournemouth. I did think that they would. I didn't think it'd be 5-0 though. Whereas Brighton lost at home to relegation-threatened Everton. A very poor result for them as well. So both sides are going to be looking for some confidence builders going into this one. As for the reverse fixture on Game Week 5, it was a 2-2 draw at the Amex. So not much to go on coming into this one. What I would say, though, is that Forest are unbeaten in all of their home matches since November. But despite losing at home last week, Brighton have actually won all of their last 3 away games. So again, makes it very hard to split them. In terms of injuries and suspensions, Brighton can now call upon a fully fit attacking line with the likes of Mitoma, Welbeck, Ruter, João Pedro, even the likes of Solly March fit and available again. However, speaking of Mitoma, he has been subject to a £65 million bid from Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia, which I believe has been rejected. But that sort of money being thrown around is the sort of thing that could cause some problems. Obviously, more on Al Nassr later. As for Nottingham Forest, it looks like Hudson-Odoi could still be an injury doubt for them. We'll have to wait for the press conference from Nuno to see if he is going to be available. But other than that, both teams are near enough fit and ready to go. To be honest, from what I've seen of these two sides in the last couple of weeks, I wouldn't rule out another 2-2 draw like what we saw at the Amex earlier in the season. But for me, with Forest being at home, still being in the Champions League places, looking to bounce back from that humiliation last week, I'm still going to go for them. I'm going to go for a 3-2 victory to Nottingham Forest. I would expect there to be a fair few goals in this one. Speaking of Forest humiliation, the side that did that to them was, of course, AFC Bournemouth, and they are the subject of the first 3 o'clock game on Saturday as they take on league leaders Liverpool at home this weekend. And do you know what? This is a really tough one to call, certainly in terms of how the sides are playing over recent weeks. Both of these sides, in all of their last 2 matches, or so literally the last 4 matches between these two sides, have seen 5 goals. Liverpool and Bournemouth have won them all, but 5 goals involved in each of their last 2 matches coming into this. It means that Bournemouth are now unbeaten in their last 12 games after that victory over Forest. Liverpool are unbeaten in their last 18 Premier League matches, which includes beating Bournemouth 3-0 at Anfield earlier on in the season. So if Liverpool can avoid defeat in this one, they'll be unbeaten the equivalent of half a season. So that's a good achievement for them. They've won 11 of their last 12 against Bournemouth as well, which is probably the biggest stat that people need to be aware of coming into this one. 11 of the last 12 Liverpool have won against Bournemouth, only losing the 1-0 after we'd beating them 9-0 earlier in the season just a few years back. And not only did they beat them 3-0 at Anfield earlier this season, they beat them 4-0 last season at Bournemouth as well. That said, as we've already mentioned, Bournemouth are on a much better run of form than they were back then, and despite all of their injury issues, they're just seemingly unfazed at the moment, picking up result after result. Justin Kluivert's on absolute fire, and the good news for them is they have no fresh injury concerns coming into this one either. For Liverpool, it looks like Curtis Jones is still going to be missing, as is Diogo Jota, but their full usual first team players, the likes of Salah and Van Dijk and Alisson and a few others, etc., Trent, all rested in that defeat to PSV Eindhoven. It's why I've not really talked about it, because it's unfair for me to go Liverpool need to bounce back from a defeat where they literally played their full reserve team against PSV in midweek and still won their Champions League table come the end of it. In my head, Liverpool definitely should be considered the favourites for this one, but the way Bournemouth have played against Newcastle and Forest, now being at home again, I've got to back them in this one. As we always say, my job is to provide you with information. The predictions are just for fun. And my head tells me that Bournemouth are going to take this, and I'm going to go for a 2-1 win. But I'm being very cautious about that. Liverpool, in my head, still should be favourites. From the top, we move towards the bottom, where we find 2 sides who had incredible victories last week. Everton winning at Brighton, as we've already spoken about. Leicester winning at Tottenham, ending that 7-game losing streak, which now means that both of these sides are outside the relegation zone. Obviously, Everton were already, but Leicester have jumped over Wolves with that win over Spurs last week. It was a 1-1 draw at Leicester earlier on this season, but that's not really much to go on either. Yes, the majority of the players are still the same, but Everton were being managed by Sean Dyche, and Leicester were being managed by Steve Cooper. We've now got David Moyes and Ruud van Nistelrooy, 2 completely different managers with completely different mindsets to the previous managers. So it's quite hard to look at a head-to-head record here where literally the 2 managers are completely different coming into this. So you really have to look at more recent form when it comes to making a decision for this game. What I would say is what I questioned about Everton last week was whether or not they could continue that goal-scoring form after getting the goals that we saw from them 2 weeks prior. To go to Brighton and get a 1-0 win shows that they are able to do it. Okay, it was a penalty, but against a Leicester side that is seriously conceding goals left, right and centre, you've got to fancy Everton to be the favourites here, even if Dominic Calvert-Lewin is now confirmed to have a hamstring injury and will be unavailable for this one. What I'm now going to do is ask that exact same question of Leicester. Scoring 2 away at a Spurs side with no defence is easier than what some people might suggest, whereas now they've got to travel to Everton, who, despite being 16th, have the 6th best defensive record in the Premier League this season, and they haven't shown any more defensive frailty since David Moyes took over. So, for me, it's Everton's game to lose. They should be the favourites for this one. I'm going for a 2-0 victory to Everton. Somehow, slipping even further down to the bottom, we have the bottom 2 clubs in the Premier League right now, in Ipswich Town and Southampton. Both of these sides have lost their last 3 matches in a row. Their only wins in the last month have respectively been their FA Cup wins, literally before these 3-game losing streaks. So at least they have that to fall back on when they play in FA Cup again next week. What it does mean, though, is that both of these sides are seriously struggling now. For Southampton, they are 10 points behind Ipswich, even though Ipswich are 19th, and Southampton only have 6 points in total. That's how far adrift they are. But The good news is for them is they were actually able to get one of their 6 points at home to Ipswich earlier on in the season. The problem for them is it's now been confirmed that Tyler Dibbling will be out for potentially as late as the end of February. So you're looking for him to be out for potentially another entire month. At least the good news for them is it probably means he stays at the end of this transfer window, but obviously everyone expects him to leave in the summer. In terms of young talent, it's going to be Ipswich who will be looking to their young talent, especially striker Liam Delap, to capitalise on Southampton's defensive record, which we've just spoken about defensive records. Southampton's is the worst in the Premier League. Ipswich, obviously, both sides desperately in need of points here. Yes, Southampton have been performing better since Juric took over, but the results speak for themselves. They're simply not good enough. Surely, this is Ipswich's game to lose. I'm going for a 3-1 victory to Ipswich Town. Final 3 o'clock game then sees Newcastle taking on Fulham. And look, Newcastle, of course, victors over Southampton last week, but let's not forget, in their previous home match, they were beaten 4-1 at home by Bournemouth. Fulham, on the other hand, were, of course, defeated by Manchester United. But it's worth noting that Fulham did get the 3-1 victory over Newcastle at Craven Cottage earlier on this season. But the problem for them is that's their only win against Newcastle in any of their last 10 matches against the side from up north. And in fact, Newcastle have 6 clean sheets in their last 8 home matches against Fulham, winning every single one of them. So really a lot of favour in Newcastle, and certainly in terms of the head-to-head record coming into this one. In terms of injuries and suspensions, there aren't any potentially fresh ones for either side. Almiron has, of course, left to go back to America, so he's not going to be available for Newcastle. And there is a big question over the goalkeepers. We spoke about it last week. Nick Pope is back. Dubravka played in goal last week. Will it be Dubravka or Pope this week? Does it matter? It remains to be seen. But like I say, for Fulham, there are no fresh concerns. For me, though, again, with Newcastle being the home side, it's certainly their game to lose. And if we're being honest, Fulham's defending of late has been really suspect. They've been giving away so many cheap goals by giving the ball away or just not fully concentrating in defence. And I think with how good Newcastle have been in front of goal recently, you have to think that they're going to take this one pretty comfortably. I'm going for a 3-0 victory to Newcastle. Now it's time for the late kickoff on Saturday, and it's a Midlands derby. It is Wolves taking on Aston Villa, and unfortunately for Wolves, they find themselves back in the relegation zone once again following 3 defeats in a row. That said, those 3 defeats have come against sides all currently occupying top 6 places, but it's not getting much easier for them because Aston Villa currently sit 8th in the Premier League table, after also finishing 8th in the Champions League table, which means they have automatically qualified for the last 16 in the Champions League. So well done to them. But I mentioned we'd be talking about Al Nassr again at some point, because Aston Villa have received 77 million for Jean Duran, who is moving to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. Let me know your thoughts on that decision from him and the club down in the comment section below. But it does mean that Ollie Watkins is now going to be the lone striker once again. For Wolves, they're also going to be missing João Gomez. He picked up a red card against Arsenal in a very controversial game that we will talk about again a little bit later on. For Villa, not only are they going to be without John Duran, they're also going to be without Matty Cash. He went off with a muscular injury in the Champions League win over Celtic at the weekend, which also means Villa's injury crisis is starting to mount up even more. They are really struggling for defenders at the moment, and that could be an opportunity for Wolves to capitalise on that. We spoke about the prospect of Digne playing centre-back and Maatsen playing left-back with the injuries to Mings and Pau Torres and Diego Carlos moving to Turkey. This, that and the other. They're still yet to sign a replacement for any of those defensive injuries coming into this game. So with Wolves' attacking line fully fit and ready to go, there is definitely an opportunity for Wolves to capitalise on Villa's defensive problems. Villa won the game 3-1 at Villa Park in match day 5, but they actually haven't won a game at Molineux since 2020. And even though they're still playing pretty well at the moment, with Wolves desperate for points, with Villa vulnerable at the back, I think Wolves are going to capitalise on those problems. I don't think it's going to be enough for Wolves to get the win, but I think it's going to be enough for a draw. I'm going for an entertaining game on Saturday night as I go for a 2-2 draw between Wolves and Aston Villa. On to Sunday then, and the two early kickoffs on Sunday feature the two Europa League sides that played last night. The first of those is Tottenham, who travel to Brentford, but it's not the European form we have to talk about for Spurs. It is the Premier League form. 1 point out of a possible 21 sees Ange Postecoglou's job, in theory, hanging by a thread, but we've not actually seen any reports that he might actually be sacked. And obviously, as we've just spoken about, they did win again in Europe last night. Back-to-back wins for them in Europe. And they're, of course, winning their EFL Cup semi-final. So it's not all doom and gloom for Tottenham. It's just not looking very good in the Premier League. Their actual goal scorers last night were all academy graduates. So maybe they should start looking at their youngsters a bit more to get themselves some results. And, of course, Mickey van der Ven back and available for them could be massive as they look to salvage their Premier League season. Finally now we'll talk about the hosts, which are of course Brentford, who we mentioned about their home form so much over the course of this season, but rather bizarrely, their home form has suddenly gone out the window with no wins in any of their last 5 matches at home for Brentford now. But, bizarrely, they've won their last 2 away games after not winning any until the first of those 2 away games just a couple of weeks ago. That, of course, was a victory against Crystal Palace last week, which is hopefully going to build some momentum up for them going into this one. But we shall see. There are no fresh injury concerns for Brentford. Obviously, we've already covered the injury issues with Spurs, so we'll see how it sort of goes in terms of that. I think Spurs will probably be the stronger side coming into this one. They did win the reverse fixture 3-1 earlier on in the season, but again, that was when Brentford couldn't buy a point away from home in the Premier League. Their home form has been much better all season long. But what I would say, though, is every single Premier League match between these two sides at the G-Tech since Brentford got promoted has ended in a draw. And to be honest, I look at the form of these two sides and a draw seems about right for me. So that's where I'm going. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. And let's move on to the other side that played in Europe last night, which was, of course, my club, Manchester United. 5 wins out of 6 now for Ruben Amorim's side. A massive turnaround in form for them. It looks like it's starting to get going, but they now come up against a side who has caused them so many problems in the Premier League era. That is, of course, Crystal Palace. 3 of the last 5 matches at Old Trafford between Manchester United and Crystal Palace have resulted in a Crystal Palace win, with the 6th of those also being a draw. So only 2 wins in 6 for United at home to Palace in the last 6 years. For Palace, of course, their unbeaten run came to an end with that defeat at home to Brentford last week, so they'll be looking to bounce back from that. The only good news for them, of course, is the likes of Esse, who came off the bench and scored with his first touch. He is now going to be pushing for a start for Crystal Palace. For Manchester United, it looks like they have Luke Shaw available for this one and could potentially have Dorgu available as well. But from what I'm reading, he's not even going to have his medical until Saturday, so he's certainly not going to be able to meet the deadline of 12 p.m. today to be able to play against Palace. So potentially still no left-backs for Manchester United, but reports are Luke Shaw could feature at some point. Of course, there's also still question marks surrounding the futures of Garnacho and Rashford, but at least one of those 2 players is still giving it their all in training and on the football pitch. Will Garnacho still be there before the game against Palace? As a United fan, I certainly hope so. The reverse fixture in September ended in a 0-0 draw, and to be honest, I can't see there being much more goals in this one either, especially given how these two sides have been playing recently. But I'm putting my biased hat on again. I'm backing United to make it 6 wins out of 7, and I'm also backing them to get 3 clean sheets in a row. I'm going for another 1-0 win to Manchester United. Now it's time for the main event. Arsenal, Manchester City, 2nd against 4th, the rematch of the stay humble gate from earlier on in the season. The chaotic fixture with Trossard getting sent off for kicking the ball away, Rodri picking up his ACL injury, which has completely derailed Manchester City's season It has been an absolutely chaotic match that's led to a chaotic season since that match. And well, for Arsenal, they of course come into this off the back of getting that incredible 10-man victory over Wolves after that highly controversial Lewis Skelly red card. The only interesting thing about it is he's won his appeal, but I'd still be surprised if he starts this game. Calafiori obviously scored against Manchester City. He then scored last week as well. And against that sort of City attacking lineup, I'm sure Calafiori will probably be the one that starts at left back. But I guess Arsenal have got to do what they've got to do to protect their young players. As for Manchester City, it's back-to-back 3-1 wins for them, beating Chelsea last week, beating Club Brugge to qualify for the Champions League last 16 in midweek. And even though they had that little bit of a wobble against PSG, I think they're still building and building and building. In terms of their injuries and suspensions, there's no fresh concerns, but they're still looking very dodgy at the back. So we'll see. In my head, there is absolutely no scoreline that would surprise me here. I feel like I need to say that for you guys. There is no scoreline that would surprise me here. 0-0 wouldn't surprise me. 3-0 Arsenal wouldn't surprise me. 3-0 City wouldn't surprise me. A 4-4 draw wouldn't surprise me. Both sides look a little bit dodgy. City's defence looks all over the place. Arsenal aren't very comfortable at the moment and are missing so many chances at the other end. So I just don't really know where to put this. The other final bit of news is that David Raya could be missing for Arsenal. And if any of you saw the highlights of what Neto was doing in the Champions League in midweek, that would fill City with an awful lot of confidence if they see Neto in goal for Arsenal coming into this one. I've just had this little feeling all week that City are going to take this. Again, the predictions are for fun. I've given you the information. In my head, I just think City are going to nick it. I'm going to go 3-2 to City. Arsenal should definitely be considered favourites, but I've had this feeling all week that City are going to take it. So that's where I'm going. And then finally, it's the Monday Night Football, Chelsea and West Ham United. And there's no better place to start with this fixture than by mentioning that Chelsea won 3-0 at the London Stadium earlier on this season, which is the only real thing I can go on going into this game because these two sides have been so inconsistent over recent weeks. It's hard to sort of discern how good a form either of these sides are in. Chelsea have good performances, then terrible performances. West Ham's results just aren't quite there at the moment. And of course, they're still struggling for forwards. There's yet to be an injury update regarding Lucas Paqueta. He, of course, had that groin injury at the end of the game against Villa last week. A game that West Ham got the 1-1 draw away at Villa Park. Again, sort of highlighting their poor form, their inconsistent form at the moment. But I am seeing reports that Jarrod Bowen could be back for West Ham in this game, which obviously if he is back, that is a massive boost for them. For Chelsea, no new injury or suspension concerns coming into it, but a lot of reports surrounding some of their players. Felix could be going to Villa, Disasi could be going to Villa, and Nkunku could be going to Bayern Munich or Manchester United. Are they going to be making any signings? They've missed out on Duran. Could they dive in for another striker or another winger? Are they going in for Garnacho? There's just so much uncertainty around the Chelsea squad at the moment that I do think it has an impact on them on the pitch. Do I think it's going to be enough for them to then slip up against a West Ham side that has not got anything at Stamford Bridge since 2019? I don't think so. I think Chelsea's home form against West Ham speaks for itself. 5 wins in a row. I think they're going to have it again here. I'm going to end these predictions with a 2-1 victory to Chelsea. And that is going to be it for today's video. As always, a massive thank you to all of you that have watched. Let me know all your thoughts down in the comment section below. Drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be back with my post-match reaction to Manchester United Crystal Palace on Sunday. And then we have EFL Cup predictions coming for you next week before FA Cup predictions this time next week. Thank you very much for watching once again. I'll see you very soon.